What's up, beautiful people, and welcome to my channel. I am so excited because today we finally get into Black History Month content. As you can see from the title, I'll be discussing African proverbs, but not just any African proverbs from Google, like in my last two African proverbs videos from 2 years ago. I encourage you to check those out. I define what proverbs are and briefly talk about their significance in African culture. I then go on to list a few proverbs and give my interpretation of them. The videos are linked below. In today's video, the proverbs are pulled right out of an African classic, Things Fall Apart by Nigerian author Chinua Achebe, and we shall get into why I don't like the book. But first, proverbs. Well, a brief description of my history with this book, and then proverbs, my interpretation of them, and then the review of the book. So let's get right into it. So I remember reading Things Fall Apart at least twice in Cameroon as part of our school curriculum, and then I read it again in the 10th grade here in the US. I remember distinctly my classmates not being into the book, and understandably so. It was different. The names were more complicated than they might have been used to, as were the foods and practices described in the book. But I didn't mind much, obviously. These things were familiar. Anyway, up until I read the book again over the last couple of months, which was the first time I read it as an adult, I couldn't remember anything that happened in that book, except for the name of the main character, Okonkwo, who is the embodiment of toxic masculinity, but we'll get to that in a few. And upon reading this book over the last couple of months, I realized it was chock full of proverbs. So we begin with the first one I noticed. An old woman is always uneasy when dry bones are mentioned. This is on page 21. So basically, if the shoe fits, you'd only get offended if a general unpleasant comment applies to you. Next proverb, also on the same page. The lizard that jumps from the high Iroko tree to the ground said he would praise himself if no one else did. My interpretation of that is positive affirmation. Clap for your own self. Pat your own self on the back. Don't wait around for people to praise you or give you a seat at your table. Build your own table. Next proverb on page 22. Eneke the bird says that since men have learned to shoot without missing, he has learned to fly without perching. Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. Basically, if you've been burned a couple of times, whether it's by coworkers or former friends or exes, you become heavily guarded. Fourth proverb on page 24 and 25. A proud heart can survive a general failure because such a failure does not prick its pride. It is more difficult and more bitter when a man fails alone. Basically represents all of 2020. We were all suffering, whether it was mentally, physically, emotionally, financially, as a result of the pandemic and the civil unrest. We were all in this together, so we were #together alone. So it stunk less. Next proverb on page 66. A chick that will grow into a cock can be spotted the very day it hatches. Is the equivalent of saying someone was born to do great things because he or she has had the it factor from day one. For instance, someone who does comedy for a living may have always had a knack for turning would-be stressful situations into something funny. Next proverb on page 70 and 71. When mother cow is chewing grass, its young ones watch its mouth. The apple doesn't fall too far from the tree. Next one on page 125. If one finger brought oil, it soiled the others. One bad apple ruins the bunch. Next one on page 165. I cannot live on the bank of a river and wash my hands with spittle. My interpretation of that is to make use of my resources. I cannot live where there's a lot of water close by and yet I wash my hands with spit. Next one, as a man danced, so the drums were beaten for him. This is another way of saying the universe will conform to your will, or God will make a way where there seems to be no way. And the last proverb I picked out from this book is, a child cannot pay for its mother's milk. In other words, you cannot repay your mother for all the things she's done for you, but you can show appreciation. Now let's move on to my book review. First, it's important to note that this book was published in the late 50s, which would explain why I feel some of the thought processes and practices prevalent throughout the book are a bit archaic. Oh, but don't get it twisted. The writing is excellent. I love a well-crafted sentence. However, the storyline is a bit choppy. The first half of the book highlights traditions, social practices, and customs in the fictitious village of Umuofia, such as whenever men are having a meeting, they must drink palm wine and eat kola nuts. Whenever a man wants to marry a woman, asking the woman's father for her hand is a big affair, complete with paying bride prices. Men are respected when they are warriors.
I accept your challenge.
Have titles, are married, and have children that they provide for. Village meetings are held on a regular. They frequently consult with the oracle, which is their deity. The second half of the book showcases the very foundation of Umuofia becoming very shaky with the arrival of white missionaries and Christianity. This I found interesting because though the inhabitants of Umuofia weren't snatched up, chained, put on a boat and taken away to a foreign land, they were being enslaved on their own soil. And the main character Okonkwo, who is a warrior, wants his people to fight against this oppression. But they don't, and he winds up hanging himself before the white missionaries do, because he was not going to submit to the takeover. Now I draw a parallel with this and Killmonger at the end of Black Panther.
Just bury me in the ocean with my ancestors that jumped from the ships, because they knew death was better than bondage.
And while we are on the topic of Okonkwo, let's discuss toxic masculinity. First of all, he has 3 wives. Now, it's not uncommon for some men to have more than one wife in some African traditions. As a matter of fact, when I was growing up, there was this man, MONGO FAYA, and I'm not entirely sure if that was his real name or an alias, but he was said to have at least 50 wives. 50 wives. 50 wives. Now that may have been a slight exaggeration, but he did have several wives. Actually, as I was editing this video, I watched a documentary which said he had 80 wives. I have linked the documentary below, but it is in French for my French viewers. Now, having several wives and children was a sign of wealth. Now, I personally call it irresponsible and greedy. Now, if you're into polyamory, I'm not knocking you, but me, I can't share my man with another woman, let alone 49. Now back to Okonkwo. He has 3 wives and he beats them. He beat the one wife because she didn't make him dinner, but his other 2 wives had cooked, so I mean, homeboy wasn't starving. Even if he was, beating on a woman for any reason isn't justified. Now, if you've been rocking with me heavy for a while, you'll remember that I did mention in my Facts About Cameroon video from about 2 years ago that there were some things about my culture that I did not like. Now, I mentioned in my Cameroon tag video that there were some things that I loved about Cameroon and other things I didn't particularly like. Politics is one of those things I don't like. Without going into too much detail, it's like this. Men beating on women is one of those. Where here in the US, a man beating on his wife or girlfriend will get him charged with battery and assault. In Cameroon, the man would face little to no consequences. Again, this may have changed since I left, but when I was growing up, it was the norm. My next door neighbor used to beat on his wife for minor things, and the walls were thin and we would hear her screaming, but she never left him. They had 4 kids together. There was even a song by an artist called Petit Pays entitled Pourquoi Papa a tapé Mama? Why did father beat mother? Now, of course, not all men did it, but it was normal, and for me, even at the age of 7, it didn't sit right with me, which is why for the longest I swore that I wouldn't marry an African man, because my thinking was I'm gonna have 5 kids by this man who is gonna beat me every day. Now, of course, I don't think that way anymore, but I do recognize where those feelings were stemming from. And I'm not in therapy yet, so y'all gotta give me props for that. But what was funny about this whole thing was exactly where was I going to find a non-African to marry? Remember, this was way before I even knew I'd be coming to America. So there's that. Now, along with Okonkwo beating on his wives, he also did not like his first son, Nwoye, because Nwoye did not take after him, i.e. he did not exhibit the same toxic traits. This was the same son who ran away and disowned Okonkwo when the white missionaries showed up. In Okonkwo's response, he called Nwoye a woman, which is the worst thing you could do to a man. This reminded me of the whole Kevin Hart tweet debacle, the reason he ended up not hosting the Oscars 2 years ago. Toxic masculinity aside, there were other problems with this book. There were a lot of typos and no real conclusion. Aside from Okonkwo hanging himself, I don't know what became of his family, and some things could have been left out of the book because it did not add anything to the story. Alright, that's all I have for you. Let me know in the comment section if you've read the book, and if you have, what are your thoughts? Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you on Thursday.
It was always on fire, our house, our dreams. We were dancing on a wire, reckless.